Welcome to AARP, Arizona Hispanic Connection. Educate. Celebrate. Connect. Arizona Hispanic Connection.
Welcome to AARP, Arizona Hispanic Connection, for another very, very important show today. The name of the show is César Chávez, a conversation with Frank Barrios. And Frank Barrios is my guest today. Frank, you always stepped to the plate whenever I call on you, so I'm very appreciative of that. Thank you so very much for joining me once again.
Thank you. I appreciate what you're doing, and a voice to the Latino community of Phoenix. And so anytime I can help or assist, I'm here, como se dice en español, a su servicio.
Oh, qué bueno. Thank you so much, Frank. Frank is a retired individual. He is an engineer by trade, but he is involved in so many organizations, and you have been for pretty much all your life. Today we have a very, very important subject. Is again César Chávez, a conversation with Frank Barrios. We will talk about César Chávez, but I really wanted Frank to come because he's a historian. He's very knowledgeable about what has happened in Phoenix, in Arizona, and more specifically in Phoenix. He even wrote a book. It's called Mexicans of Phoenix. So it's great to have you, Frank, and just to hear your input, your observations as we review some of Cesar's life and work. So again, thank you so very much. So one of the things that I would like to do is basically review some of the highlights of César Chávez's life, and then ask you, Frank, to basically provide background, to provide more meat to the points that I will say. César Chávez, I believe we can say, would you agree, Frank, that it's almost like a worldwide known person? Would you say almost worldwide?
Absolutely. I think I would put him right up there with Mahatma Gandhi and Martin Luther King. Each of them were a voice for their people. And César Chávez was a voice for the Mexican-American community. And he fought for justice. And even though his fight was aimed at the agricultural injustices that were occurring, but throughout the United States, everybody came to him for injustices that were being done against the Mexican American in many other areas. He became a symbol, the same way Martin Luther King and Mahatma Gandhi became a symbol for justice.
If we think about it, Frank, it's very difficult to find another leader of that, with that kind of, penetration into the mind of communities and countries. Would you say that? I mean, I can think of others. I mean, we had others more local, but it seems like César Chávez went beyond local, right?
Exactly. He was, as I compared him to those other two figures that were worldwide figures for justice. And César Chávez was that way. He symbolized justice, a fight for justice, and very few people attain that status. You go back to Socrates, maybe in Greece or something, but of recent times, especially the movement for racial justice. It started, with Mahatma Gandhi in India, and then Martin Luther King followed a lot of what Mahatma did, but except for the black community. And I think it's fair to say César Chávez followed the same thing. The fast is the same thing Mahatma Gandhi did in India.
Right. Let me address a few of the points that people might be interested in knowing. César Chávez was born in March 31st, 1927. And it just dawned on me that this is actually, he was growing up during the Great Depression. Sometimes, I don't know why, until I did a little bit of research, I got, into the website of the United Farm Worker website, the César Chávez Foundation, and I began to get a few more details. And it's interesting. He was actually, growing up during the Great Depression. He was born, could we say San Luis? I mean, I know it was not Yuma necessarily, but in that area, you're talking about 1927. By that time, was it clear, do you think? Could we say probably it was in San Luis?
You could. I'm not familiar with it. I know that there's a home in the area today that is honored as a monument to César Chávez.
Right. And it's interesting because eventually he became more of a Californiano, right? He literally left. And let me get into that a little bit. He was named after his grandfather, and I also learned that his grandfather's name was Cesario. It almost seems like César Cesario. I don't know if he was probably also named Cesario and eventually became César. Anyhow, he was born and he lived in an adobe home. So they had a humble beginning. And, I want to read something real fast before we go on the first break. It says, Cesar's father agreed to clear 80 acres of land, and in exchange, he would receive the deed to 4 acres of land that adjoined the home. The agreement was broken, and the land sold to a man named Justice Jackson. Cesar's dad went to a lawyer who advised him to borrow money and buy the land. Later, when Cesar's father could not pay the interest on the loan, the lawyer bought back the land and sold it to the original owner. Cesar learned a lesson about injustice that he would never forget. Later, he would say, the love for justice that is in us is not only the best part of our being, but it is also the most true to our nature. So right off the bat, he's, a young man, and his father has to go through this. I'm sure that had a big impact on him. Would you agree?
Oh, absolutely. That was something that stayed with him. And again, his fight was for justice. And
right.
It's always interesting if you look at the Mexican Revolution that occurred years before. There was the injustice to the poor people that caused that too.
Right.
But this was Cesar Chavez was born in the United States, what we call a Mexican American.
Right.
And he was a very much a symbol of a U.S. citizen with Mexican American background who was fighting for the justice for his community.
Definitely. Then in 1938, he and his family moved to California. Cesar was 11. This is his dad. They moved to California. They live in La Colonia Barrio in Oxnard for a short period, returning to Arizona several months later. Then they returned to California in June, and this time they settle in San Jose. They live in the barrio called Sal Si Puedes. How about that? Cesar thought the only way to get out of the circle of poverty was to work his way up and send the kids to college. He and his family worked in the fields of California, from Brawley to Oxnard, Atascadero, Gonzales, King City, Salinas, McFarland, Delano, Wasco, Selma, Kingsburg, and Mendota. Amazing. So he basically, through the ordeal that they went through, they lost pretty much everything. This, again, is during the Great Depression. They went to California and literally began to work in the fields. We are going to have to go to a short break. Stay with us. You are listening to AARP Arizona Hispanic Connection. The subject today, César Chávez. A conversation with Frank Barrios. We'll be right back.
Welcome to AARP, Arizona Hispanic Connection. Educate. Celebrate. Connect. Arizona Hispanic Connection.
Thank you. Thank you for staying with us. This is AARP, Arizona Hispanic Connection. Very important show today. César Chávez, a conversation with Frank Barrios. Another thing that is important to note is that Frank, and this was very common in those days, he only spoke Spanish at home, and when he went to school, there was segregation, and they were forbidden to speak Spanish, and if they did, they were punished. I also have information that he and his brother Richard, this is César Chávez, and his brother Richard attended 37 schools. So was this issue of being punished for speaking in Spanish and then going to many schools, especially families who work in fields, was that, I would imagine it was common in those days?
Oh, yeah, very much so. In fact, there was actually a movement called the Americanization movement, where people who spoke another language, they tried to break their home language so they could only speak English. Native Americans at the Indian school here in Phoenix, they were punished if they were caught speaking their own language. They cut their hair, and it wasn't done out of meanness when they started it. The idea was they wanted everybody to look, they couldn't necessarily look, but sound just like other Americans. It would open jobs for them, was the thought. But in reality, it was a very cruel practice. The people take pride in who they are.
Right.
Their language and their culture is a major part of that.
Right. So eventually, Cesar's dad has an accident, and he did not want to see his mother, Juana. Juana was mother's name. He did not want his mother, Juana, to work in the field. So he literally got out of school, did not continue, and instead became a migrant farm worker. So César Chávez was a migrant farm worker. His childhood school education was not the best. Later in life, education was his passion. The walls of his office in La Paz, this is the UFW worker headquarters, are lined with hundreds of books, philosophy, economics, cooperatives and unions, biographies on Gandhi. There we go. And the Kennedys. He believed that the end of all education should surely be service to others. So we see a man here that even though circumstances did not allow him to go to school, higher than 8th grade, he read a lot. And you said that that you feel he was influenced by Gandhi, correct?
Oh, I believe that. So was Martin Luther King, because it was found nonviolence, and you can make changes.
So that was basically the Gandhi message, right? You can generate change without violence, and that's what sometimes is very difficult to believe. And I believe some that opposed César Chávez in the early on, they said this is not going to work. Your philosophy of nonviolence, it almost sounds like they wanted violence.
Well, and just to make certain, a good part of what makes that work, the Gandhi experience, is the public relations, where there are cameras and TVs and showing what's occurring. It changes the hearts and minds of people who are watching. And just like in Gandhi, there was film crews that brought those to the United States. All of a sudden, money started going to India to support Gandhi. César Chávez, if nobody's looking, the bosses, if you will, and whoever they might be, can sometimes be very cruel. Bring in the police, beat the people, throw them off the land, and if you don't fight back, they win. But if you're there with publicity, articles being written about what is occurring, all of a sudden the entire thing can begin to change.
So basically, they didn't have social media, but they used the media as much as they could, and it is so true. These days, that philosophy will work, but it has to be accompanied by lots of media, right?
Exactly.
You said to bring others in, to touch their hearts and know the real causes of why they're doing what they're doing.
And it's important to note that the students at the universities, especially here at ASU, the students just rallied around Cesar Chavez. They really supported his movement. And then you had famous people who were supporting him: Joan Baez, Bobby Kennedy, the Kennedys, and having those people support you along with public relations. And the students were totally involved in this. They were basically the Chicano movement was initiated because of that.
And Frank, off the air, you were relating to me that at this juncture, you have Cesar, who is born in this country. He's a full-blown, if we can use the term, Mexican-American. But in your book, you talk about this other group of more Mexican or linked more to Mexico that were also very, very active in the community. Are we seeing two groups here, kind of two different groups?
Absolutely. I think I interviewed a lot of who, back in the Cesar Chavez days, were kids going to ASU, and almost everyone would tell me there were clashes with their parents because their parents wanted them to go out and make a living and earn money, and here they were being activists. And there was a lot of friction, generational friction.
I see.
And maybe you see a little of that today. Generations have different directions that they go in.
Right. So the parents, you said they send the kids, they are invested in their education, so you need to make money. But here are this group of ASU students primarily that are gravitating to the Cesar Chavez causa, right?
That's right. And many of them you know today: Danny Ortega, Alfredo Gutierrez, Chris Marin, Ardo Thon. There's all the leaders in the Mexican community today in the Phoenix area, where a vast majority of those people were students at ASU supporting Cesar Chavez in those early years.
Amazing.
So it sort of was the beginning of the movement. And today, many of those people, Joe Eddie Lopez was one of them, became a state senator, became a county superintendent, and he was heavily involved in this.
So in some ways, Cesar Chavez, could you say that influenced the later on Chicanos por la Causa, for example, was initiated?
I believe so. The people who started Chicanos por la Causa were the same people that were supporting Cesar Chavez, and they were almost all of them were young ASU students. Today they're middle-aged to older.
Right. If we continue with Cesar Chavez's beginning, he joined the U.S. Navy. He served for 2 years. He was 19 years old in 1946. This is post Second World War, correct? Or
yes, right, just right after.
Right after, yeah. And then in 1948, when he was 21, he married Helen Favela. And it says that they honeymooned in California by visiting all the Californian missions from Sonoma to San Diego. Again, the influence of education. They settled in Delano and started their family. First Fernando, then Silvia, then Linda, and 5 more children were to follow, and so on and so forth. So he got lots of influence from I would say, people that you've mentioned. And I mean, I read about this Father Donald McDonald. Then Saint Francis and Gandhi and nonviolence concepts. So he was reading a lot. He was really becoming educated and other approaches to activism.
And I might add, the Catholic Church religious groups were strong supporters of him. The very mention that he went to all the missions. Gandhi was a very religious man, and but it wasn't just Catholics. It also was many of the Protestant groups joined with him.
Right.
Because it was a fight for justice.
Right. We also see here that Cesar became an organizer for ROS organization, the Community Service Organization, CSO, his first task was voter registration. So he becomes, again, involved with the community service organization. Is this organization something you are familiar with, the community service organizations of those days?
Not heavily. It was, but again, look at what Martin Luther King did. To get out the vote was a major thing. And again, Martin Luther King was doing this to where they could change the future by voting and get out the vote. And Cesar was doing the same thing for the Mexican-American community that was here.
So, Frank, the United Farm Workers Union is formed. How big was that? I know César Chávez saw the conditions that the campesinos were working under, the pesticides, the working hours, working conditions. He really saw that, and he wanted to change that. So basically, his activism led to this key point of forming the United Farm Workers. How big is that, and why?
Well, he basically started a new union. Mm-hmm. And if you look at the history of the unions in the United States, many people have died over these battles of the union. Mm-hmm. And there's no doubt in my mind, as Martin Luther King and Gandhi, they had no problem with dying for the cause. And when you start a union, and especially the farmers were not easy people to work with. They were tough, hard people. They were people of the land. They knew how to make a living, but they had their way of doing things. And when all of a sudden you try to unionize some people who think this way, there could be a lot of consternation. But it didn't bother him. He was, I think, in my opinion, he was ready to give his life for this cause of justice.
Amazing. So when the United Farm Workers Union was formed, is the UFW, they actually made this flag, and the flag that we see today, even to this day, and they have an eagle on this flag. And Cesar was very interested. He had this very, I would call it, I guess, profound concepts about symbolisms. And I got this quote. He did that, the flag and the eagle. He says that he would give the flag would give courage to the farm workers with their own powerful symbols. Cesar made reference to the flag by stating, "A symbol is an important thing. That is why we chose the Aztec eagle." So he was still linking, his movement to this pride in people of Mexican descent, to the Aztecas, right? It gives pride. When people see it, they know it means dignity.
I read an article once said, if you don't have pride on who you are, you're not going to succeed, and you're not worth a lot. You have to take pride, and we're all Americans. But if you have this, you're a separate group of Americans, such as the Mexican American. They have a culture, and you have to take pride. Yes, you take pride in being an American, but also you've got to have pride on your heritage, who you are, where you came from, your people. And if you don't, you're not going to be a very
so I notice a bit of difference, right? And it's a cultural thing, and then being an American, but then you have an identity, and that's what you're referring to.
That's correct.
You have to have that identity and feel proud of it.
Exactly.
Got it. We are going to have to go on our second break. Thank you for staying with us. We're going to be back in just a minute. You're listening to AARP Arizona Hispanic Connection. The show today is César Chávez, a conversation with Frank Barrios. We'll be right back.
Welcome to AARP, Arizona Hispanic Connection. Educate. Celebrate. Connect. Arizona Hispanic Connection.
Thank you. Thank you for staying with us. This is AARP, Arizona Hispanic Connection. The subject today, César Chávez, a conversation with Frank Barrios. We are kind of reviewing a few or highlighting a few of the items related to César's life, upbringing. and also his main work that which was literally related to the formation of this union, which became pretty strong. At some point, it says that they were claiming 50,000 dues-paying members. That's a lot of people, and that thanks to Cesar's tireless leadership and nonviolent tactics that included the Delano grape strike, the fast that focused national attention on farm workers' problems, and the 340-mile march from Delano to Sacramento in 1966. The farm workers and supporters carried banners with the Black Eagle with Huelga or strike and Viva la Causa, long live our cause. Marches wanted the state government to pass laws which would permit farm workers to organize into a union and allow collective bargaining agreements. Cesar made people aware of the struggles of farm workers for better pay and safer working conditions. He succeeded through nonviolent tactics, boycotts, pickets, and strikes. So, Frank, the union again. You off the air, you told me that this started way early on in the beginning of this country, but now moving to this particular community that they are unionizing. And was that something? I assume that was powerful to have this huge union with so many people, and then with the tactic, the non-violent tactic, that was pretty powerful. And I assume they accomplished many things.
Oh, absolutely. It especially with the farm workers, which there was horrible injustices being done by the bosses of these folks. And when he unionized, when they come together to change the injustice that was being done, this was huge. And especially when you're talking about an industry, millions of dollars, Southern California, the agricultural community of California and Arizona is huge. And he started the strike to make changes to bring justice to the workers, and of course the people who have things going the way they have been are going to fight it in many ways.
Right.
And I mentioned it earlier. These were tough people that had come up a hard way, and they weren't going to just let it happen. But if the union is right and there's justice with the union, you're going to win. And like I mentioned, you had the students, you had famous people coming out, you had the news coverage. All of this supported Cesar Chavez because his fight was justified.
Right. And
eventually changes were made. But if you look at the history of unions, in the past, there's been bloodletting. Unions, especially around the turn of the century, is when the unions started to be formed stronger than ever. But there were huge battles going on with the unions. I think Cesar knew it. I think Cesar was willing to give his life for the cause.
Amazing. You know, in the website, again, of the United Farm Workers website, there's lots of great information. If you have a chance you that are listening to this show, to visit their website, it's ufw.org. They have lots of great information. And in it, I found some quotes. They have a bunch of quotes from Cesar Chavez, but I would like to read 3 of them that are, to me, very, very amazing. It says, preservation of one's own culture does not require contempt or disrespect for other cultures. That's what he said. And then he also said, it's ironic that those who till the soil, cultivate and harvest the fruits, vegetables, and other foods that fill your tables with abundance have nothing left for themselves. That is so interesting. I mean, that's why he believed in the dignity of the campesinos, and just like everybody. Let me just read the last quote. Once social change begins, it cannot be reversed. You cannot uneducate the person who has learned to read. You cannot humiliate the person who feels pride. You cannot oppress the people who are not afraid anymore.
Beautiful. But also, no, Cesar's fight was in the agricultural community, but there was a lot of injustice going on in the United States against Mexican Americans. I don't know if any of you remember the movie Giant
No, not me.
with Rock Hudson and some other very famous people, but it showed the attitude of people, farmers, cattlemen in Texas against Mexican Americans, and but you had a lot of discrimination, a lot of evil going on against Mexican Americans. Even though Cesar concentrated on agriculture, this was the seeds that allowed other Mexican Americans to start fighting against other injustices in other areas. There were segregated schools in some places. There was segregated restaurants. In fact, the movie Giant is a good example. In fact, there were people that were furious when the movie Giant came out because it shined the light on segregation. And the movie was supposed to be, I think the period was in the 50s to 60s, but it was because most people didn't want to even think about there was this type of thing occurring against anybody. But all of a sudden, here's a movie that shows what's going on.
Amazing. You know, one thing that we have to mention here is that Cesar was not alone. Dolores Huerta play an amazing role in everything that is happening with the United Farm Workers Movement. And, you know, not so, or I should say, recently there is a documentary. I think it's called Dolores. I don't know if you have seen it.
I have.
I believe I saw it. I don't know if it's parts of it or all of it. And again, it's the story of this two, this man and this woman who literally have given their lives, and even till today, Dolores Huerta is still alive. I believe she's 83, if I'm not mistaken, and she's still going at it. Actually, there is a foundation called the Dolores Huerta Foundation, and then César Chávez. There's also a César Chávez Foundation that you can look up online. And obviously the United Farm Workers website, they just have so much information. And obviously, I tried, and I will keep trying to bring Dolores Huerta to this show hopefully soon. I haven't been successful, but I would like to bring her to tell her story. But it's unbelievable. I mean, we don't have enough time to cover all the amazing work and the amazing, influence that they had on people. I mean, to this day, and even like Dolores Huerta, she did not only get involved with the campesinos, but also with the feminist movement, as I think that's what they call it, and she was super strong on that, and she made inroads into it and help. Even today, she's still a symbol of women empowerment, if you will. So again, hopefully one day, I don't lose the hope, I will bring Dolores Huerta to our show as well.
I just got to add one thing. The Cesar Chavez movement, one of the things that's so important in there, it was the start of a movement. And it was in the agricultural community, but it just like exploded into all the other areas of civil rights, as you mentioned, feminism, other areas that I mentioned where there was injustice were occurring to the Mexican community. And just like one group that we have, Chicanos por la Causa here in the Phoenix area, they started with Cesar Chavez, but morphed into justice for the urban areas. But it again, that match that started, the seed that was planted in Cesar Chavez grew into a civil rights tree.
Amazing.
And into many, many other areas. But that's why he's so important, because he was the person that started the movements that we have today.
Right. Before we go on our last break, I want to read something, because another thing that happened that he did was to fast. In addition to organizing, he fasted. fast. He fasted several times. And let me just read something that he was quoted in the website. Cesar said about the fast, a fast is first and foremost personal. It is a fast for the purification of my own body, mind, and soul. The fast is also a heartfelt prayer for purification and strengthening for all those who work beside me in the farm worker movement. The fast is also an act of penance for those in positions of moral authority and for all men and women activists who know what is right and just, who know that they could and should do more. The fast is finally a declaration of non-cooperation with supermarkets who promote and sell and profit from California table grapes. Amazing. These are just some of his words regarding fasting. He did several fasts, right, Frank? And I believe that at some point he stopped one of his last ones, I believe, and it says that he actually communicated that fast or was continued by some leaders. Even I believe the Kennedys, if I'm not mistaken, continue that fast.
Yeah, they may have, and again, it's there's a very strong religious overtone. When you think of fasting, it's usually associated with Christianity and fasting, or well, I shouldn't say that. It's also other religions have fasting in it too. So he used a religious mechanism to show how important it was to him.
Right.
And there's no doubt all that he did, but the fasting was probably the most dramatic gesture that he could make, where he wouldn't eat because of the injustice that we're going forward.
Amazing. Like you said, he was definitely willing to give up his life. And in the end, you probably could say that he did.
Yes.
You know, he did give up his life for the ideals that he fought for and he believed. Stay with us. We're going to take our last break. We are addressing César Chávez, a conversation with Frank Barrios. This is AARP Arizona Hispanic Connection. We'll be right back.
Welcome to AARP, Arizona Hispanic Connection. Educate. Celebrate. Connect. Arizona Hispanic Connection.
Thank you. Thank you for staying with us. This is AARP Arizona Hispanic Connection. César Chávez, a conversation with Frank Barrios, is the subject today. And we have to kind of come to a close. Cesar died in April 23rd, 1993, near Yuma, Arizona, a short distance from the small family farm in the Gila River Valley, where he was born more than 66 years before. So he actually lived about 66 years. He died pretty young, I would say. And so I don't want to end the show without also saying that he was buried in actually, I believe they call it, let me see, they call it I have it here, but it was the headquarters of the union in California. They actually buried him there, if my information here is correct. And also there is a recognition that is given at the president by the president. So yeah, he did receive the Medal of Honor that given to a member of the community, and his wife actually received it from President Clinton. If I'm not mistaken, Frank, it was President Obama who declared March 31st Cesar Chavez Day, if I'm not mistaken, right?
I think you're right.
Yeah, March 31st is Cesar Chavez's day. And I would like to before we end, to read a little bit that I have here on the history of Si Se Puede. I think this is an amazing point. It says, in May of 1972, a decade after Cesar Chavez founded the union, the legislature in his native state of Arizona pushed through a bill sponsored by agribusiness agribusiness, denying farm workers the right to strike and boycott during harvest seasons, and effectively making it impossible for them to organize. The United Farm Workers asked to meet with Republican Governor Jack Williams to appeal for him to veto the legislation. Instead, the governor ordered state troopers to bring him the bill, and he signed it within an hour after passage. In response to a protest by farm workers, the governor remarked, "As far as I'm concerned, those people don't exist." That's what happened. When the news of the law's enactment reached him, Cesar returned to Arizona and began a 25-day water-only fast. The fast quickly took a physical toll. After a few days, Cesar was bedridden, resting on his back in a small room with UFW co-founder Dolores Huerta and by his side. Cesar was briefed by a group of local Latino labor and political leaders about political realities in the state. The leaders offered a refrain Cesar and Dolores heard many times. The grower lobby, the dominated state politics, the legislature and governor was so powerful. These Latino leaders declared it could not be beaten. Cesar and Dolores silently listened while they explained while they explained why the fast and efforts by farm workers would be fruitless. Here it is. No se puede. No se puede. The people, they kept repeating in Spanish. No se puede. Dolores immediately picked up the call. And, Dolores responded, sí. Sí se puede. And that was the birth of the slogan, "Sí se puede." It wasn't at a juncture that is amazing. It didn't just happen. It was at this particular juncture where the governor just did not help. I thought it was just an amazing account.
That really is. But I think you also, his legacy, the legacy of Cesar Chavez is that I can tell you right now, many of the leaders who ran for the legislature and Board of Supervisors and so on were people who were supporters of Cesar Chavez, who were part of the group trying to make changes. Joe Eddie Lopez said not only on the Maricopa Board of Supervisors, but he also was a member of the legislature. Ed Pastor, I put him in there too.
Right.
And then you have people like Alfredo, who was state legislature. And again, all of these people they began with Cesar Chavez as supporters of him, and then from what they were able to do, it just exploded into not only civil rights but fighting for justice in the highest places. And the match that started this was a man named Cesar Chavez.
Amazing. I found my information here. The body of Cesar Chavez was taken to La Paz, the UFW's California headquarters, by his family and UFW leadership. He was laid to rest near a bed of roses in front of his office. On August 8, 1994, at a White House ceremony, Helen Chavez, Cesar's widow, accepted the Medal of Freedom for her late husband from President Clinton. In the citation accompanying America's highest civilian honor, which was awarded after his death, the president praised Chavez for having, quote, faced formidable, often violent opposition with dignity and non-violence, and he was victorious.
And I would add that if you ever seen pictures of that funeral, everybody that was anybody was there. Movie actors, presidents. I mean, it was amazing the number of people that came to that funeral. It was just like a who's who of the United States.
Right. And he was victorious. Cesar Chavez left our world better than he found it, and his legacy inspires us still. He was, for his own people, a Moses figure. This is Clinton speaking. The president declared the farm workers who labor in the fields and yearn for respect and self-sufficiency pin their hopes on this remarkable man who, with faith and discipline, spoke soft-spoken, humility, and amazing inner strength, led a very courageous life. Amazing. I believe I have another It says the citation accompanying the award noted how Chavez was a farm worker from childhood who possessed a deep personal understanding of the plight of migrant workers, and he labored all his years to live their lives. During his lifetime, Chavez never earned more than $5,000 a year. The late Senator Robert Kennedy called him one of the heroic figures of our time. And Chavez's successor, UFW President Arturo Rodriguez, thanked the president on behalf of the United Farm Workers and said, every day in California and other states where farm workers are organizing, César Chávez lives in their hearts. César lives wherever Americans he inspired work nonviolently for social change. Amazing. So this is basically what happened when César dies, and it's unbelievable. In the 2-3 minutes, Frank, that we have, I would like to ask you how you see his efforts merging in basically creating also an addition to that Latino causa, right, to the Chicano causa, and moving from campesinos to education to power in politics, etc. How do you see that building and evolving from his start?
Well, what you've got to do is identify where there is injustice, and then and I can tell you, I hate to say it, but it seems like every day I watch news and there's more injustice coming into the world, and you first identify injustice, then you try to make changes. And change is not easy. It never comes easy. In these issues like the farm worker that he did, he was willing to give his life to try to make those changes. And we've got to see wherever there's injustice, we've got to make the effort to change it. And we have a lot of models for that. Martin Luther, Gandhi, César Chávez, these people were models. And of course they didn't give into violence. If you know, when you go to war and two people kill each other, women, children die. If you win, what do you win?
Right.
But if you can make changes without bringing in violence, that's the way it should be done, and that's a message that I think carries into today.
So that's the Gandhi philosophy, which Martin Luther King Jr. picked up, and obviously César was also in the same frame of mind. So Frank, I think we still have a couple of minutes. So you mentioned that some of the young students who were going to ASU at the time, they gravitated to César's movement, if you will. So those folks eventually, and then we know here in Arizona, Chicanos por la Causa was founded. Would you consider that was like a continuation of the César Chávez movement in some sense?
Oh, yes, very much so. In fact, all of the people who founded Chicanos por la Causa were all heavily involved in the César Chávez movement. And one of the differences that came out of it, of course, César Chávez's main direction was in agriculture. But when Chicanos por la Causa started, they also were looking primarily looking to make changes in the cities, in the urban areas, because there was a lot of poor Mexicanos, Mexican Americans living in the cities that had no chance of bettering themselves. So that same attitude was brought to Chicanos, and Chicanos por la Causa basically went out to try to improve the lives of those people living in poverty in those areas. And again, it's the same thing César did, except it was for the agricultural movement.
Right.
But and again, it was like a wildfire. Pretty soon it goes off in that direction. Maybe it goes off in the opposite direction somewhere else. But the idea is justice, justice, justice.
And even in those days, Frank, Raul H. Castro became the first Mexican-American governor of Arizona. You mentioned late Congressman Pastor, and then we have Grijalba. And even at the state level, we have so many Latino legislators. So that has to be encouraging. That has to be a sign of progress. Would you agree?
Oh, absolutely. And maybe we could even call it the legacy of César Chávez, because we had a black president in Obama. Would he have gotten there without the efforts of the Martin Luther King and the people that were supporting him? And there were so many Mexican Americans that are in high position today in the Phoenix area. How many of them can have to thank César Chávez for the changes that he made through his life?
And you know, March 31st is César Chávez Day. It was declared by the President Obama. That's huge. So this is all the time we have for now. We hope you enjoy the show. This was AARP, Arizona Hispanic Connection. Have yourselves a great day.